Has anybody received any answers back from the government on whether you have any meetings lined up?
I'm still
Now?
waiting.
Oh,
Just
got
started
ours.
rolling in.
we haven't had anything sent back as far as I know.
We're just starting to
Good.
get some now.
Okay.
Just so everybody is aware, we are out of practice session and we're getting ready to start. I'm not sure. We got one screen that's not working.
Oh, okay, then I'll move over here.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We start this morning with a public hearing. I'm Mark Pendergraft and I'll be chairing the public hearing this morning. So I'll start with the public hearing address. This is a public hearing for proposed Regional District of Okanagan-Similkameen bylaw number 2800.15/2022. The proposed bylaw and related information, including written comments received to date, is available for review at the head table. At this public hearing, all persons wishing to speak will be given an opportunity to do so and are asked to commence their remarks by stating their name and address. Written comments may be submitted to the head table before the closure of this public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak at this public hearing is asked to do one of the following. If you are participating by a computer, please click the raise hand button, which can be found in the participants panel on the right-hand side of your computer screen. This will indicate that you wish to speak. If you are participating by a phone, please press *3 on your phone's keypad. This will also indicate that you wish to speak. Having indicated that you wish to speak, you will then be placed in a queue until you are invited to speak. All speakers will be restricted to a time limit of 5 minutes until everyone who wishes to speak has had an opportunity to do so. Anyone wishing to speak a second time may do so by following the same protocol of selecting the raise hand button on your computer or by pressing *3 on your phone's keypad. To submit written comments, please email them to planning@rdos.bc.ca prior to the close of this public hearing. I will now ask Shannon Duong, planner, to outline the specifics of the proposed bylaw. Please go ahead, Shannon.
Thank you to the chair. As mentioned, this is a public hearing in relation to zoning amendment bylaw number 2800.15/2022 in relation to the property at 41 Black Area C. The land designation that applies to this property is agriculture, and its current zoning designation is agriculture 1. The property is entirely within the ALR and is 5.28 hectares in size and currently contains vineyards, a tasting and bakery building, as well as a winery production and residence building. Now, in relation to the proposed development, the applicant is proposing to construct a 271 square meter residence on top of a winery and tasting room and bakery building, where the winery will be located on the first floor, a tasting room and bakery area will be located on the second floor, and the residence will be located on the third floor. With respect to the relevant permitted uses under the Agriculture 1 zone, the Agriculture 1 zoning allows for a alcohol production facility on the property, as well as a single detached dwelling, which is defined as a detached building that contains one dwelling unit used for residential use by one family and may contain a secondary suite. In this case, as the residence would be located on top of a multi-use building, this is not considered to be a single detached dwelling and would rather be considered under the accessory dwelling definition. Now, for accessory dwellings, parcels under 8 hectares in size are limited to one accessory dwelling to a maximum floor area of 125 square meters. Given the proposed size of 271 square meters for that accessory dwelling, the applicant is proposing an amendment to the Okanagan Valley zoning bylaw to rezone the property from Agriculture 1 to Agriculture 1 site specific for that particular floor area. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shannon. I will declare the public hearing open and ask if there is anyone who wishes to speak to the proposed bylaws. If there's anyone who wishes to speak, please press the raise hand button or *3 on your phone. I'll ask for a second time. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to the proposed bylaws? Are you seeing any hands, Adam, that I might be missing? Okay. I'll ask for a third and final time. Is there anyone who wishes to speak further to the proposed bylaws? And I would also remind you, this is the last opportunity to submit letters via email to or concerning this proposed bylaw change. Seeing no hands, I hereby declare this public hearing closed at 9:05. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and attendance. We will move straight into corporate services. We have before us a proposed agenda. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda. Moved, seconded, thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. Any opposed? Motion carries. We have the one item, which is UBCM resolutions. I'll go to the CAO on this. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I thought I'd just remind committee of the resolutions that we do have in the resolutions booklet that UBCM sent out a week or so ago. We had, I believe it was 9 of them that we had submitted. A lot of them went through SILGA first and were endorsed by them. We do have 6 resolutions that were in the endorsed block from the UBCM executive. So that was endorsed block 3, which was our BC EHS requirement to partner. So our British Columbia Emergency Health Services requirement to partner with local governments on policy developments. So that's in the endorsed block. There was EB8, which was the CAR 40 program regarding a mobile mental health unit. There was EB18, which was about physician recruitment for specialists. They did propose a small amendment on that one, but nevertheless, it's basically our resolution. So that's in the endorsed block. There was EB59, which was sustainable funding for libraries. EB67, which was a requirement on the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to conduct a snow clearing prioritization review. And there was EB70, which was another requirement on Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to reconsider safety and speed on rural roads. So those are all in the endorsed block. There won't be debate on those. They'll just go and whether the membership votes for the block or not. That would be the only decision there. We did have 2 resolutions that were submitted that had been similar to others that other local governments had proposed. So they are in the really the referred section. So it's RR4 and RR24. So both of those also won't be debated, I guess is the correct form of discussion on that one. So that was on flood mitigation, orphan dikes, and ride sharing. And they were both similar to other recommendations that were already in the endorsed block. So the only one that we're left with was this no recommendation number 20, which was the review of the homeowner's grant. So we would have to have a member of an elected official at UBCM put this on the floor and then be prepared to present it and open it for debate. So that would be the discussion, Mr. Chair, is to make sure that we have somebody that's prepared in order to do that.
Okay, thank you. If memory serves me right, the homeowners grant was Director Knodel. And between Director Knodel and myself, we'll make sure that one of us is there to make sure it's on the floor. So if the board's okay with that, I think we can not have to worry about that.
I heard you chatting previously into the practice session about the UBCM meeting requests. So I thought I'd give you an update on the RDOS meeting requests. We had 7 that we had proposed. And I believe now of the 7, we have 4 that have been approved. Just 2 more came in this morning. And we have 1 that was not approved. So the Glassell Lake water license issue was declined. And we got a polite note back just saying they had too many applications to meet with the Minister of Forests in order to have that meeting approved. On the approved ones, we did get, let me pull up my recent list then. So we have an approved meeting with the Minister of Education and Childcare. This is on the school board boundary realignment for Apex. So that one is set, and you'll get a list of these from Legislative Services once we hear from the other ministers. The homeowner grant increase for seniors with the Minister of Finance was approved. The KVR Trail Recovery update from the Minister, actually this is going to be with the Parliamentary Secretary for Environment, but it's on the KVR Trail Recovery, was approved. We do have a meeting with the Minister of Agriculture and Food on the organic processing facility, which you'll recall is hung up at the Agricultural Land Commission. And we have 2 outstanding yet. So we're still waiting for response from the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure on traffic calming measures. And we're still waiting on the Parliamentary Secretary for Emergency Preparedness on Emergency Operations Center costs. So those are our 7, Mr. Chair, and we'll provide book and briefing notes on those prior to UBCM.
Okay, thank you. Good to see that they're finally getting a response back as to whether there actually is a meeting or not. I'm hoping the other 2 are within the next day or so as well, so we can get the package out to everybody. Is there any questions from anybody on the board in regards to this? I'm seeing no hands, so that completes the agenda for corporate services. So looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Perfect. Anybody opposed? Motion carries. That takes us over to Protective Services, and I will go to Director Roberts to chair this one. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to accept the agenda for Protective Services? Director Robinson and Director Trainer. All in favor? All right. I now would like to pass this on to CAO in regards to our delegate from Red Dragon Consulting.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So regardless of the actual events over the summer, we did have an emergency management exercise back in May that involved the regional district and our 6-member municipalities. And it was Red Dragon Consulting was the primary on this, but also a number of other associates in the emergency management field that were participating and providing the evaluation and the control throughout the exercise. So we do have our friend Mr. Edmonds back to present to committee, and he's going to give you the lowdown on how we did back on exercise conflagration integration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Newell. I've got a short presentation, around about 20 minutes, and then we can open the floor for questions. So I'll just share my screens. As Mr. Newell mentioned, we've done a 4-activity project with the Regional District Okanagan Smilkameen in April, May and June to go through a series of different exercises. I'm sure you've all seen our report, which was put together under a strategic alliance for enhanced resilience, which is a group of consultants where I was the lead from Red Dragon Consulting. Within that report, we talk about the presentation, the projects that we have undertaken with the RDOS, the exercise, and then we launch into 3 different sections about training considerations, jurisdictional considerations per municipality and regional district, and then an overarching summary. So this presentation is going to follow that same vein. The project phases, like I mentioned, there was 4 project phases. The first one on the 25th of April was a 2-hour EOC activation discussion with senior management from the RDOS. Then the following day, on 26th of April in the Lakeside, there was a 3-hour discussion based on the emergency exercise that was unfolding from day 1 or activity 1 with a wider range of RDOS staff from EOC sections. We then moved into the week of May the 2nd, where we actually done a roadshow around 5 different municipalities and done a half-day discussion-based exercise, still based on the same scenario that we launched on the 25th of April, which was a wildfire scenario. This led to some applied training through these activities to a functional exercise on the 16th of May. Throughout all of these activities, we looked at activation triggers, how people set up the EOC, the situation awareness, information management, EOC priorities, the functions and staffing plans within each of the EOCs, and then the communication requirements for the partners and how resources were managed. So it was quite in-depth. We had around about 15 exercise controllers on the actual exercise for the large functional exercise. So the functional exercise that took place, it was a multi-jurisdictional coordination event. All municipalities were participating either within the EOCs or as part of the RDOS. And it was there to explore how each of the EOC community players worked together and how the other communities worked together also. So we exercised the coordination and the function of public messaging. We understood where resources were, and we put in scenario injects to make sure that municipalities talk to each other and, of course, talk to the RDOS. A big component of the functional exercise was actually management by objective, where EOC action plans was a task within the exercise to bring together all the information, all the resources available, what was the impact on critical infrastructure from the wildfire scenario, and what were the contingencies. So there was a EOC action planning exercise took place as part of the functional exercise to look for the gaps and look for the strengths within the all the different partners and how you all come together. Like I said, it was a credible scenario. Obviously, we fabricated parts of it. It was a wildfire. It was a numerous wildfire events that impacted most of the municipalities. We played interface wildfires so that the municipalities would start talking about the what ifs and what our contingency plans were. There was an expectation for communication, and there was certainly a lot of communication. Our exercise simulation cell received 220 something calls from the different municipalities and the regional district. Like I said, all exercises are artificial. We did fabricate some escalation within it, with each of the fires impacting the municipalities so that we can have engaging conversations. And in each one of the RDOS, South, Summerland, Oliver, Princeton, we had exercise controllers and we also had exercise observers. The Red Dragon team, we had 5-6 exercise simulation cell officers, including a member of the Okanagan Nation Alliance and Emergency Management BC to add a little bit of realism for the conversations that was happening from each of the EOCs back and forth. So jumping into the training considerations, during the roadshow, we saw a number of best practices from each of the municipalities and the RDOS. The establishment and maintenance of rosters for EOC transferable skills. We saw leadership, teamwork and communications within the different EOCs. And from the training, we actually recommend that each of the municipalities look at their formal training programs. They look towards refresher sessions because some staff was the first time they were in an EOC or they hadn't done training for a number of years. Each of the municipalities in the regional district look at establishing preferred contractors and supplier lists in the event of an emergency, and that there's a regional EOC section committee for an event impacting a larger percentage of population. The next few slides jumps into the jurisdictional exercise considerations for each one of the communities. And we saw best practices within the RDOS regarding leadership, how resource requests and expenditure authorization forms were processed. There was a very robust process within the EOC. The expenditure authorization forms were tracked. So this is the eligible cost between the local government and Emergency Management BC was tracked very well. There was very good information officer outreach to all the other information officers in the municipalities and First Nations, I hasten to add. And the EOC management team had a good situational awareness of the event that was unfolding during those 4 to 5 hours. From a recommendations perspective, there needs to be a scalable EOC plan. So if an event goes from level 1, 2 or 3, that the EOC can move and bring in staff in order to cope with the demands on it. Planning and the GIS staff should be co-located within the exercise. They were not. There should be dedicated incoming and outgoing communications and telephone numbers within the EOC. And as part of the exercise, we did slightly overload our RDOS operations team where we had to slow down the telephone calls that was coming in from our simulation cell. But I would say that the operations staff said it added a little bit of realism that there were so many telephone calls that they tried to receive. A good sharing platform to make sure there's good situation awareness within the EOC of what's coming in and those priorities. As you can imagine, if we're having lots of telephone calls into smaller rooms, there should be headsets to stop background noise. For the director, planning and the operations chief, we recommend scribes, so to take notes and to make sure you continue with the situation awareness. There's always opportunities to engage First Nation, and this was this was a good project that we did include First Nations within it, but I think it needs to carry on. There needs to be continuing of staff drills and practice, so they practice the EOC activities at a section level. There also needs to be adequate agency representation within the EOC. We were lucky to have a BC wildfire observer for the exercise, but in a real event, it's always good to have appropriate agency representation. Action planning is a common theme with all jurisdictions and our recommendations, and this is a strength that needs to be looked at. And the more sharing information, we're always behind the curveball in EOCs. Information is key, and if we can share through whether a platform or through regional liaison officers, then it's gonna help you in the future. Moving on to the City of Penticton. Best practices, we saw strong crisis communication staff. We saw good risk management, assessment of the information was coming in. There was good leadership within the EOC. There was strong emergency support services knowledge. There was a strong Penticton Indian band working relationship. We saw evidence of good worker care and good teamwork And it was also, the exercise was a good opportunity for a shift change of staff and for staff to brief their incoming staff. Recommendations, situation display boards could be improved within the EOC. Direct dial telephones, very similar to what I said on the previous slide. Additional telephones within the EOC, because our exercise simulation cell was certainly putting everybody through their paces. Information display as it comes into the room to make sure as everybody is aware was only a normal whiteboard. I think there could be improvements there. Functional processes and line of sight, apologies for the typo, in the new EOC design. So make sure functions talk to functions. So we have planning talks to operations, operations talk to logistics. So it's just the ergonomics of the room. Also recommend the integration with data sets within the ArcGIS dashboard with partners rather than separate. Build organizational depth, look again to training and how operations briefings are conducted. Moving to Summerland, our recommendations include an alternative facility. It was council chambers. It did work satisfactorily for the exercise, but I think there should be consideration of where the EOC is in the future. Dedicated telephone lines and PC devices. It was definitely bring your own device to Summerland. Information displays, we had numerous whiteboards within the room, but again, they quickly got outdated with information coming in. Again, a training program, whether formal or refresher sessions, is recommended, as well as some organizational depth to make sure you're not only training and exercising your core team, because they obviously need time off during prolonged events. The EOC readiness, there's a cabinet fully stocked with equipment, but people had to go and retrieve items. So there definitely needs to be a readiness assessment of that EOC. Also look for UBCM grant opportunities to improve whatever facility is decided upon. Within the exercise, we saw a few leaders of the EOC, and I think within some land you could have some EOC champions to make sure the EOC runs as smoothly as possible. And again, suppliers and resource lists, and assign EOC functions to core dedicated teams, staff before they walk into the room. Moving to Osoyoos, again, alternative facility. Osoyoos has got a great fire hall with where we've done our training, whereas the exercise actually took place in a different building. There's an opportunity to look at ArcGIS and Lightship within Osoyoos to gain a better situation awareness and use of GIS within the EOC. Dedicated telephones, hardware, software, PC and devices was, as you can see, a common theme where rooms are not set up ready for EOCs. As well as information displays, we used numerous whiteboards and pads to make sure there was situation awareness within the room. Organizational depth, again, is a recommendation. Core staff were aware of EOC responsibilities, but there needs to be, for a prolonged event, more staff should be included with those training. The EOC forms within the training, the refresher sessions, there should be practice of how to fill the forms in, whether it's an expenditure authorization form or resource request or even the action plan. Again, action planning is a common theme with all the throughout the exercise, and obviously the EOC readiness if there was an event. Moving on to Oliver, EOC readiness is the continuing theme. There's an opportunity to go to UBCM for hardware. There's lots of equipment within the room, but it's not connected. And there's a decision by the town of Oliver to decide is the EOC devices or bring your own. And again, a formal training program is recommended with organizational depth and scribes for those main functions of director, planning and operations if there's enough staff available. Hard copy versus digital maps. It was difficult within the exercise to see the maps, and I must say staff went and retrieved a hard copy map, but both maps should be available to make sure you continue good situational awareness. And again, recommendation is the action planning process to be looked at. For the town of Princeton, the RDOS and the town need to look at its relationship between events that unfold. You have to align the transferable skills in the municipal role, the day job, into the EOC. Public Works Superintendent is a good example who can be the operations chief, for instance. Again, like other municipalities, the EOC was run in the council chambers. There should be a consideration of alternative EOC to make sure that there's EOC readiness. And again, look at granting opportunities for hardware to improve that facility. Formal training program, as I mentioned quite a few times before, should be looked at for refreshers and practices for staff. And again, that organizational depth. And I'm fully aware that not all organizations have staff waiting to come into the EOC. But wherever possible, we should make sure EOC training is further afield than the core staff that always attend. Scribes, again, would be useful for the director, planning and operations, if possible, or at least the director, to make sure that you can capture actions and give tasks to people. It goes without saying that there's special gratitude for the First Nations that took part within the exercise. And I'm very pleased that because I live, work and play within the Okanagan Nation area. So Osoyoos Indian Band actually attended the EOCs at Oliver and Osoyoos. Penticton Indian Band attended Summerland and the regional district. Upper Smilkameen Indian Band attended Princeton, and the Okanagan Nation Alliance actually was part of our simulation cells. So there's special gratitude here for the First Nations because we exercised an additional component to the project for Indigenous liaison. I think there was around about 30 staff from the different First Nations within the different EOCs. Just running on to the last few slides. This is from the recommendation summary. So this is the overarching summary within the report. There's an opportunity for the RDOS and partners to review the governance model and potentially lobby the provincial government for additional resources from a regional perspective. IPRIM is one of those examples that was put in place by Emergency Management BC after being lobbied by regional districts. And that IPRIM vision statement is included in the report. And they've actually got 2 staff to undertake activities for each one of those member communities. And they're there to develop and deliver coordinated, seamless emergency management strategies and integrate concept of operations. So they look at making sure you have staff available, the training, and all the plans and procedures, so it's very consistent across the region, so you can call upon them. So there's an opportunity to review the governance model and look to lobby because there's already been a precedent set where it's funded by EMBC. Obviously, we've seen training and we've seen grant opportunities. I know that from this project itself, it was a combined grant. Our recommendation is that you continue those joint grant submissions. You are stronger together and you get a wider benefit of working together and identifying gaps and then strengthening all the areas that you need. As with training, there should be a cyclic program of training and exercising. This doesn't need to be large exercises that we just went through. It consists of training, of drills, of practice, of EOC form fill-in for 1 hour, for instance, is all part of that program, right up to tabletop discussion exercises and then large functional exercises. Exercises are there to reinforce the training and test the plans and processes and making sure you have good discussions within the exercises, which builds on that foundation of training. By having that cyclic training program, all together as a region, you're going to build on the knowledge and competencies of staff. The EOC action plan was an activity that we made sure that we undertook as part of each of those 4 activities I mentioned on slide 2. And we actually went through the roadshow and explained the EOC action plan. And this is the Emergency Management BC's concept of operations that they should be following, where teams provide briefing status reports, and then they develop the action plan, and then they come together to look at who is doing what, where are the gaps, who can support each other, and what is the plan going forward in a summary perspective. This was tested within each one of those activities and within the functional exercise, where we got every section together to go through the action plans. I must admit that was a little bit of an overload for all staff through a functional exercise because of the realism. And our recommendation is that the liaison officers from the EOCs should come together to compare the EOC action plans and conduct a regional call to determine where the gaps are, and collaborate further for the event that's unfolding. Regional response coordination. For multi-jurisdictional events, you've got numerous strengths within the different municipalities in the regional district, and it's our recommendation that you look at your strengths, where the RDOS leads the critical infrastructure assurance and advanced planning. And City of Penticton and the RDOS have strong crisis communications and GIS. So you should look to the strengths within the municipality to support each other and lead through that. Our sub-recommendation is that there should be some kind of committee or subcommittee, and that should be chaired on a rotational basis to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. We heard a lot about host communities during the roadshows and in the functional exercise. There's some very strong emergency support services knowledge within the RDOS and member municipalities and First Nations. And it's our recommendation that you go to the City of Prince George and look how they followed the methodology for compensation when fulfilling the role of host community. Often we've seen in the last few years in different places of the province, people, municipalities and regional districts say yes to becoming a host community, but they haven't got the plans in place in order to do it fully and then to recover costs afterwards. City of Prince George is a good example of where they've actually put a plan in place to seek those costs after such an event. Technical platforms, obviously there was a lot of communication between the different EOCs and our simulation cell, and I know the RDOS and partners are looking at a technical platform. It's our recommendation that you can continue to do that to make sure each of the partners are able to talk to each other and share information to ensure that there's good situation awareness and good interoperability between the different systems. Also, when considering integrated approaches, it's worthwhile understanding the cross-jurisdictional concepts of operations. So there may be a need for mobile support teams if IT is lost. If staffing are not available, you have to look at how you're going to support each other, because even with this exercise, we tested a wildfire scenario, interface wildfire within each of the municipalities. Hopefully not all municipalities will be impacted in the real world for such an event, but you may need to support each other and actually deploy staff to assist in those different areas. Coming on to my last slides. From a readiness assessment perspective, and I know there's quite a few different committees within the RDOS and member municipalities. A formalized regional emergency planning committee is strongly recommended to bring together all the considerations, all the plans, all the procedures, and address specific considerations and the gaps within and the lessons identified within the actual events and the exercise itself to build on your readiness across the whole region. We recommend that it's rotationally chaired between the different local authorities. I'd just like to say thank you very much. Red Dragon Consulting was the lead project manager for this, with Get Set Solutions, Clear Sky, In Emergence, Sundog, Prepared by Design, and More Wave Technology. We had around about 15 staff assisting in the background for this project. So I'd just like to say thank you very much on behalf of Red Dragon and the Strategic Alliance for Enhanced Resilience. I'm going to open up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Edmonds. Very well presented. Any questions for Mr. Edmonds? I have Director Holmes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just wondering, when you're talking about in the municipalities, places that require an alternative facility because they're temporary ones, aren't the most ideal. But I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on that. What exactly you think should be required in the municipalities, because I can't really see it being that practical, having a dedicated EOC room that might only be used, once every few years. And it seems to me a council chambers would actually, suits the purpose for that quite well, because it's already loaded up with technology and isn't used that often.
Yeah, what we tend to see is a lot of municipalities will use council chambers. If the desks cannot be moved, I completely take your point. It's got lots of IT and hardware within the room, but if the desk cannot be moved, then sometimes you cannot make sure the functions are aligned together. So, for instance, planning, operations, and logistics should be in a line, for instance, with GIS on the side of planning. I'm not saying having a dedicated room itself. Sometimes meeting rooms can double for EOCs if you have the hardware as well. It's good. It's a consideration for each of the municipalities to understand where they want to be and what's the flexibility. For instance, Summerland and Princeton, the council chamber was used. There was limitations where desks could go. It could be a simple fix of making sure some desks can be moved, making sure the wires aren't disconnected, of course. And then you have information displays on the wall, or even just track bars that you can load up with whiteboards in the event of an EOC being activated. Obviously, that could be used for other purposes as well. So it's a consideration depending on the municipality.
Thank you. I believe the next question was from Director Knodel.
Thank you. I was just a little curious about reliance on digital. Some of these upcoming events could greatly impact digital. We did see kind of an example from Director Coyne in the Tulameen area where their communications went down. I'm just wondering whether we should be preparing with more analog and hard copies on maps and such, and you kind of touched on that. So I just thought I'd get your opinion on that, please.
Yeah, certainly. Within EOC readiness assessments, you should look at the redundancy of systems. So whether it's the loss of IT from cyber attack, or it's the loss of power, for instance. Hard copy to digital maps, we actually exercised, the staff actually went across to get the hard copy maps and brought them back. So we had a redundancy there as a contingency plan to use it. But part of your EOC readiness, you should look at each of those systems. And one of the other recommendations was bring those the IT people together to look at the technical platforms. If digital is out or the wildfire goes through the cell phone tower, we saw Rogers out last year. How many people could receive information if Rogers was a large supplier in this area? So there is a need from the EOC readiness to make sure you're looking at your primary system and your secondary system, sometimes even your tertiary system, to make sure you are resilient. It always falls back to non-digital. When we talk about evacuations, I remember from the Tulameen event and the Princeton event, the digital board outside the library was used to make sure people were aware of things happening because people didn't have power and they didn't bring their smartphone. So there's always needs to be a readiness assessment in the proactive phases as well as the reactive part of an EOC.
Thank you. Did I see Director Bush's hand? No? Okay, Director Trainer.
Hi, Paul. I apologize if this was already mentioned in your report or if it was purposely not included, but I just have a question about volunteer groups and how they relate to emergencies. We got the after action report for the atmospheric river event that happened in 2021. And one of the big recommendations in that was that the RDOS work with local groups on the ground, volunteer groups. And they said that because of the way the RDOS is and our limited resources, we really do rely on these kind of groups during emergencies. So was a volunteer group included in this exercise, or even a mock volunteer group, and kind of how would they fit in terms of communication and keeping them involved during an emergency?
There wasn't actually a volunteer group as part of the exercise. We had numerous working parts between the 6 different EOCs. I'm aware Penticton Indian Band actually stood up and activated or the communication channels for emergency support services, but that was outside of the exercise completely. When I talk about emergency support services, I talk about the knowledge within the EOC rooms to make sure there's good communication. The RDOS is set up really to be the regional coordination for emergency support services across the region. So that is a good recommendation. And the only thing I would hasten to add from my experience is EOCs need to make sure that they continually communicate with ESS staff, whether there's an ESS director within the EOC or you have an EOC liaison, to make sure that information is flowing from EOCs to the volunteer groups at the reception centres. Because it's sometimes forgotten that ESS staff and volunteers are the face, the customer focus of the EOC, because they receive the evacuees. So having good situation awareness between the different EOCs and ESS is a must. I'm hoping that's answered your question, but volunteers weren't part of this exercise, but they're very, very important.
Thank you very much for that. Anyone else? I'm just, Director Obrick.
Thank you very much to the chair. I appear to be in a blind spot, and I don't know why, but in any event, thank you for recognizing me. I have a comment and 2 questions. The first comment is thank you very much for the report. I thought it was excellent. Really appreciate the recommendations. Was especially fond of the information comments on page 34, where you comment upon regionalization need not mean ceding authority. The key to success is cost sharing based on population, proportional benefit. I mean, the recommendations in this report, I think, are just spot on, excellent, very impressed and grateful to you for the work. The 2 questions I have, number 1 is, and I'm curious about this, and I don't know if you know the answer. It may not have been part of the report consideration, but we do have real strains in the regional district, Okanagan-Similkameen, that impact our organizational capacity. This is a big deal, this EOC issue that is for years and years now draining our staff and causing all manner of delay in other service delivery and frustrations. I hear it all the time, organizational incapacity problems related to our EOC load. My question in that context, we have 27 regional districts in the province of BC. My hunch is that we may have a disproportionate number of emergencies based on what I've seen in the news. But I wonder, do you have any information at all when you look at our population, 85,000 people, 10,500 square kilometers, and you look at what we've gone through in the last 5 years, wildfire, atmospheric river events, catastrophic. I mean, the drain on this community. So my question is, do you know, and if so, can you advise? And then I'll get to my second question next.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much. We do see similar regional districts receiving the same amount of emergencies. One example is the Carbow Regional District. they seem to get hit by numerous emergencies. And in fact, I was part of a review looking at what is the number of staff that should be part of the EOC and the regional perspective, the strategic review for the Caribou Regional District emergency management activities, because you're certainly not alone. There are numerous regional districts and municipalities and First Nations being hit with emergencies, especially in the last 5 years. Statistically speaking, since 1998 to 2018, a 1 in 50-year event on a river, for instance, pre-1998 is now a 1 in 30-year event because of the statistics and climate change. We are receiving more emergency events due to that. I would say within the Okanagan, as well as up to Kamloops and the relief rainfall that came through the atmospheric river, for instance, from Vancouver to Hope to Chilliwack, for instance, we are going to see further events that's impacting those regions. Not to say that there could well be something else happening on the West Coast next year. Climate change is unpredictable, and if I knew what they were going to be, I wouldn't be doing consultancy. So it's a bit hard question to answer, but I don't think the RDOS, there's numerous other players out there receiving the same amount of emergencies as the RDOS.
Yeah, thank you very much for that answer.
Please.
Yes, I had a second question, but just a follow-up comment, if I may. As a lawyer, my experience with litigation and dealing with other issues like medical injuries and prognosis, what experts have told me over and over and over again is the past is a good indicator of the future. And when we look at the last 5 years, I think our future, we have some pretty serious issues looking at us right now, climate change and all the objective data considered. I think we need to be proactive on this issue and really pay attention to that history. My second question, it pertains to a derivative of sorts of the question by Director Traynor, quasi-volunteers or volunteers or staffing or how to deal with our demands on our organizational capacity when it comes to functionality of EOC operations. I have met with the fire chief in our area and other fire chiefs. We have, I think, 8 volunteer fire departments. These are people who have tremendous background and experience, some of them quite phenomenal. They have told me they are willing to participate more in the EO. They want to. Now they are on call. They're trained first responders. They're very knowledgeable when it comes to command and discipline and well, I mean, fire is part of what they do, and rescue is part of what they do, and you start to look at the fit for EOC. So my question on that one is, I heard no volunteers were involved in this study, and I assume that means none of the fire departments were consulted. So were they, and if not, what do you think of the idea generally?
There's definitely strength in bringing uniformed responders into an EOC. It's worth making sure you're aware that they're trained in Incident Command System Canada, rather than Emergency Operations Centre training. So there will be a training need from that perspective. But from my past career, I've always brought responders in where possible. It will depend on the knowledge and competency that person brings, and that's the part of the EOC readiness perspective. So in that regional collaboration, yourselves and partners come together and actually look at who have we got and where our gaps are. Then you could start looking at, do we bring in other people who need to be trained to fulfill different EOC roles, for instance. I remember when I was in the RDOS in 2018, we actually had City and Penticton fire staff in operations. So there's definitely opportunities there, but make sure you look at the training backgrounds, because fire chiefs are ICS Canada, and you need to make sure you bridge the gap between EOCs, because you're bridging tactical to strategic. So there's just part of the training program, but that could assist in that regional collaboration of, if there's a large event in the west part of the RDOS, you bring in people from the south, for instance, whether they come from the municipality or the First Nation or from volunteer fire departments, that should be a consideration for yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? I'm looking at the screen. I don't see anybody, so I have one final question, and my question is for the CAO. I'm just wondering whether or not the CAO recognized the benefits of them having this particular information. Of course, very close to the situation that we just recently had, but I'm assuming that there would have been some benefits with having this exercise not too far off. So just any statements on that?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think we learn from every event that we activate for. So certainly the Carameas Creek Fire event with numerous sites that we had where it was very similar in nature to exercise conflagration. So that was good, although it didn't have all of the member municipalities involved, certainly involved Carameas. So I think we have a lot of work involved in the recommendations that have been identified out of the exercise report, as well as the after exercise reports that we just received on the atmospheric river and from the 2021 fires. So it's the right time of year for us to be looking at recommendations into our business plan for next year. And also we're doing our emergency management program evaluation that the board just approved. So I think this will also be a good step to help us move forward.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Mr. Edmonds, for your presentation and for the work that you've done with the RDOS and the other municipalities. Excellent job. Right now, could I have, I believe this is the last on the agenda for our services. So could I have a motion to adjourn? Director Bush, Director Robinson, all in favor? Good. Okay, thank you. And I'll pass this over back to the chair.
Hey, thank you, Director Roberts. The board meeting is scheduled to start at 10:30, and with the cancellation of the ambulance delegation, we've got a bit of extra time between, so we will take a break until 10:30, and we'll see you back here then.